of the Vice Chancellor's session. Thank you very much. We are going to take the anthems now, starting from the national anthem. Thereafter, we take the state anthem, and finally, the university anthem. First, the national anthem. Thank you very much. Please be seated. It is a super duper Tuesday for the management and the entire community of Nigeria's first specialized medical and health sciences university, the University of Medical Sciences, located here in Ondo City, Ondo State. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the management of this great citadel of learning, I want to warmly welcome you all to the third in the series of distinguished lectures in honor of the first Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of Governing Council, Emeritus Professor Oladipo Akinkugbe. My name is Emeritus from the Public Relations Unit of the University, and have this singular honor to introduce to you dignitaries that we have on this occasion, starting with the Vice Chancellor of this great citadel of learning. He is a professor of public health and community medicine. Please join me in welcoming Professor Adesegun Olayiwola Fatosi, MBCHB, MPH, PhD, FNA Med, FAS. You're welcome, sir. We also have on this occasion the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Administration and Clinical Services of the university. He is specialized in the area of restorative dentistry and a fellow of the West African College of Surgeons, a fellow of the National Postgraduate Medical College of Nigeria. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Professor Adolphus Odogun Lotu. A round of applause for him. We also have on this occasion the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic of the University. She is a Professor of Molecular and Cellular Parasitology and a very experienced academic. Please join me in welcoming Professor Rose Angela I. Unwoba. We also want to warmly welcome on this occasion seasoned administrator with the university. He is in charge of all the administrative work in this great citadel of learning, the registrar of the university, Dr. Waliola J. Ekundayo. We also have seated here today the bursar, the first substantive bursar of the university, with more than 20 years experience in financial management of tertiary institutions in Nigeria. Please put your hands together for Mr. M.S. Oluwanife Shitu, FCA. Welcome, sir. We also have on this occasion the librarian of the university in person of Mr. Femi Folorunso Joseph. A round of applause for him. You're welcome, sir. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, permit me at this point to intimate this audience with the presence of the distinguished lecturer for the third distinguished lecture, third Oladipo Akinkugbe distinguished lecture, in person of Dr. Ebun Ladipo Bangboe, MBBS, FWACP, FRCP, FNAN, IMR. Clinical Director, St. Nicholas Hospital, Lagos. You're highly welcome, sir. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, permit me also to warmly welcome on this occasion deans of various faculties of the university, starting with the Chairman Committee of Deans, as well as the Dean of the School of Public Health of the university, in person of Professor Wasiu Olalekan Adebinkpe. A round of applause for him. You're welcome, sir. Let me also warmly welcome and recognize on this occasion the acting dean for the Faculty of Dental Sciences of the university, in person of Dr. Ezekiel Adebayo. A round of applause for him. Thank you very much. We also have on this occasion the acting dean for the Faculty of Science of the university, in person of Dr. C.J. Olowokere. You're welcome, sir. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, permit me also to welcome and recognize on this occasion the coordinator for the committee handling events like this studies for the university. He is actually the director of the Central Office for Research Court of the university in person of Professor Olumide Ogundansi. A round of applause for him. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, we have somebody from the Oshimawe in council here present, so we can say we have the blessings of the Oshimawe on this occasion. He is the Jomo of Ondo Kingdom, High Chief A.B. Akinkugbe. You're highly welcome, sir. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, permit me to briefly intimate this audience with the presence of dignitaries from beyond the shores of this country, all the way from Hunters College University of New York, USA, a very good friend of the university, Professor Elsie Jolade. Welcome, ma. We also have from Mefo State University, Minnesota, USA, Dr. Julia Ugoji. Permit me to also intimate this audience that we have the husband of Professor Elsie Jolade here, in person of Mr. Fred Jolade. You're welcome, sir. And all the way from New Orleans, United States of America, we have Professor Olugbenga Akingbola. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, we have a representative of the Papa Akinkugbe family here present, in person of Mrs. Joko Akinkugbe. We also have Mrs. Tony Akinkugbe and Chief Lady K.I. Akinshikbe. Thank you very much. That's we build a size of recognitions for now. The moment we have other dignitaries join us for this event, we will do justice to recognizing them. Next on our program is the welcome address by the Vice Chancellor of the university. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming on the podium Professor Adeshegun Fatose, Vice Chancellor, University of Medical Sciences, UNIMED, Ondo.
The Deputy Vice Chancellor, Admin and Clinical Services, Professor Adolfo Loto. The Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academics, Professor Rosangela Honwoba. Our Registrar, Dr. Waliola Ekundayo. Our Bossa, Mr. Olunife Shitu. Our Librarian, Mr. Femi Folorenshaw. We are privileged to have a great lecturer in the house this morning. Our distinguished lecturer, Professor Hebu Oladipo Akinkugbe. The Oshimawe in Council, Oshimawe and the Oshimawe in Council, ably represented here this morning by the High Chief of Jomo of Ondo Kingdom, High Chief Ambrose, members of the Akinkugbe family, deans, professors, directors, head of departments, and other colleagues in our university, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is with great delight that I welcome you all to this occasion, the third Professor Oladipo Akinkugbe Distinguished Lecture, a very unique event in our university calendar, and a celebration of a great Nigeria and an embodiment of excellence. In the past two editions of the program, we had the privilege of either having the wife of Professor Akinkugbe, Professor Mrs. Folashade Akinkugbe, in person, or to have received the goodwill message from her. However, that is not the case this year, and that will never be the case again, as she joined the Saint Triumphant on 2nd May 2023 at the age of 85 years. Professor Akinkugbe Nidina was a retired distinguished professor of public health with focus on child health, and a great supporter of our university, and a very sweet soul to share moments with. Every time I visited the house, it has always been a wonderful time being with her. She has been a great supporter of this program and will greatly miss her. We again commiserate with the great Akinkugbe family on her demise and pray that her soul truly rests in the perfect peace that the Lord Jesus Christ, that she diligently served while she was there, has faithfully promised all those that believe in him and truly surrender their lives to him and walk in his way. May her soul rest in perfect peace. May I request that we all rise for a minute in honor of this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman. May our soul rest in perfect peace. You may be seated. Thank you. This event is truly a celebration of a great Nigerian, and like I said, an embodiment of excellence. Our university community is greatly honored and blessed to have had the late Professor Akinkugbe as our foundation pro-chancellor. On 27th of June this year, I had the privilege of giving the keynote address on the occasion of the first Excellence in Research Practice Award in my alma mater, the Great Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, Nigeria. I titled the speech, "Excellence Thrives Where It is Recognized, Celebrated, and Rewarded." And that embodies my fundamental belief about excellence and the celebration of the life and time of a man like Akinkugbe is a great reminder that excellence truly can be found in our country, but we need to recognize, celebrate, and reward it. In that speech, I made certain comments. I would like to read part of that comment to you. I said, and I quote, "I strongly believe that it's not sufficient to be brilliant. The high population of brilliant but godless individuals, men and women of unworthy character in the corridors of power and the positions of influence have been at the core of the rot that our nation has been experiencing. The selfishness, greed, and rent-seeking lifestyles of such individuals have been instrumental to the poor state of development of our nation to date. In the absence of genuine fear of God and lack of concern for others, brilliance, high educational attainment, and robust professional experiences of such individuals have made them liabilities to our nation rather than assets for the impactful development of our society. Unfortunately, these men and women who are likely looters of our national treasures and treasury are the ones we often unworthily celebrate in our society and even award them our national honor. But in Professor, end of quote, in Professor Akinkugbe, we have a man that truly deserves to be honored. A man who is not just honored by a nation, but a man who is celebrated globally, not only for his high level of brilliance, but for the integrity he demonstrates, for the character he showed, and for the light he shined in the academic community. I am proud that our university is one that truly believes in honoring a man that deserves to be honored. Professor Akinkugbe was a man of many parts, a policy maker, a great teacher, a great university administrator, a medical professional par excellence. And in all areas where he engaged himself, he truly shone brightly. As a university, we are proud to be walking in the footsteps of this great man with our focus as excellence in medical education, research, and services, and our operational philosophy as excellence or nothing. Like I often remind our university community, we are intentional in our mission to offer high-quality education across all health-related sciences and professional fields. Our choice of lecturers over the last 3 years reflect the multidimensional engagement of the great man, Professor Akinkugbe. In the first year, we had the privilege of having Professor Sikadewale, former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan, and former Head Minister. In the second edition, we had the privilege of having a great medical educator, Professor Emiola Oluwabumi Olapade Olapa, FAS, a distinguished academician, surgeon, medical teacher, and past provost of the College of Medicine of the University of Ibadan. This year, we are blessed with a great physician. We are blessed with the gift of Professor Mbangboye, who is the clinical director of one of Nigeria's leading hospitals, and an hospital that has, over the year, proved its capacity as a great and excellent institution. Dr. Mbangboye, we want to thank you very sincerely for coming, and we sincerely welcome you. I have known Dr. Mbangboye in many ways, even though we have not had a lot of time to interact one-on-one until last night when we had some time together. Dr. Mbangboye happens to be the son of one of my great teachers. I have never remembered any of us in medical school call his father doctor or professor. He has always been Baba Mbangboye. Baba Mbangboye was a father to us. He was an eminent orthopedic surgeon. I was also privileged to have been in medical school with his brother, Dr. Mbangboye, who we popularly call Ebo those days. And last night over dinner, we were sharing together how I read a book that spoke about who he was, even when he was 6 months old. A book titled Letter from Nigeria, written by a woman who served Nondo for many years as a missionary in St. Monica's. And so he's a man I feel greatly connected to. And as we hear when his CV is read, you know that we are truly blessed to be able to have him here. Again, sir, we thank you most sincerely, and we welcome you with great delight. At this junction, let me begin to bring this speech to an end. And just before I do that, let me recognize our fathers who have just come in, and I'm sure they'll be introduced as they go on. The Osemawian Council. Ekabosa. Ladies and gentlemen, as I bring this lecture to an end, I thought this speech to an end, I'm not the one giving the lecture. The lecturer is on with someone the podium. I want to thank the Akinkugbe family. Year in, year out, they have been here, and they have always been with us. We sincerely thank you. We celebrate God's greatness in your family, and we celebrate what you stand for as a people. Thank you so much for being present at this occasion. I want to thank the Academic Event Planning Committee, under the great leadership of Professor Ogundaunsi, the director of our Central Office of Research and Development, for a job well done. Professor Ogundaunsi, by the way, uses personal connection, friendship, and no classmates tie with Dr. Mbangboye to make sure he dragged him out of the clinic this morning and bring him all the way to Ife. A friend of mine used to say, what are friends for? That a friend in trouble, he says, is a nuisance. I hope it's not a nuisance. I think this morning it's been a great opportunity for him to bring you here to bless us with your knowledge and your experience. Professor Ogundaunsi, we are truly honored to have you as a member of our university community, and greatly indebted to you for the wonderful job you are doing, as well as the members of your committee. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely welcome you all. It's a time to again celebrate an unforgettable figure. But it's not just a time to just celebrate him. It's a time to, again, continue to re-examine our lives as individuals and institutions about what can we learn from this great man to use to build a great institution and to build a great country. I do hope that this morning, as we listen to this lecture, we'll be challenged to follow the path of a truly great Nigerian, the late Emeritus Professor Oladipo Akinkugbe, our first Post-Chancellor at the University of Medical Sciences. Welcome, thank you, and God bless.
A deeper round of applause for the Vice Chancellor. Thank you very much, sir. Just before we go to the main business of today, Mr. Vice Chancellor, we have on this occasion the Prime Minister and Lisa of Ondo Kingdom, High Chief Sir Simeon Olushola Oguntimei, OON. We also have on this occasion the Sachere of Ondo Kingdom, High Chief Johnson Olushola Adedoro. Welcome, sir. And Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, permit me to invite an associate professor in the internal medicine department under the Faculty of Clinical Sciences of the university to take the citation of the guest lecturer for today. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Oluwaseyi Adejumo.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great privilege for me to be the one to read the citation of Dr. Oladipo Akinkugbe. He was also one of my teachers and my trainers. He's an icon in the field of nephrology. It's a privilege. So I want to kindly ask that Dr. Akinkugbe stand up while I read the citation. Thank you, sir. Dr. Akinkugbe was born over 6 decades ago and started as a very smart and intelligent young man with an unusual appetite for learning. This gave him a somewhat early start as he proceeded to St. Saviour's School, Ebute Metta, where he started his primary school education in the mid-60s. He thereafter proceeded to the University of Ife Staff School to continue his education from 1971 to 1972. He obtained his secondary school leaving certificate from the prestigious Igbobi College, Yaba, Lagos in 1977 and served as the deputy head boy and chapel prefect. In 1979, he sat for and had an outstanding performance in his A-level exams at the same college. After his secondary school, the young Ebun, full of high dreams and aspiration, proceeded to the University of Ilorin for his medical training. His high dreams indeed became reality as he distinguished himself in so many ways in the university. In quite an unusual manner, he was both a university scholar and a federal government scholar at the university between 1981 and 1984. Not only that, Dr. Akinkugbe graduated in 1984 with a bachelor's degree of medicine and surgery in flying colors and with several academic awards. At the University of Ilorin, Dr. Akinkugbe won the Schulayer Prize for Best Medical Graduate, 2, the prize for the best performance in maternal and child health, 3, the prize for best performance in community-based experience and service and community health, 4, the university's prize for best performance at the first professional exam, second MB, 5, the Abdullahi Mohammed Faculty Prize for the best performance in child health, 6, the Pediatric Association of Nigeria Prize for the best all-round students. As a student, Dr. Akinkugbe was not only academically inclined, but he was a rounded student who took active part in political activities as a medical student. He served as the chairman of Central Organizing Committee of the Nigerian Medical Students Association in 1982. He also served as the Secretary General of the Nigerian Medical Students Association from 1982 to 1983. With the above feats, it was not surprising that Dr. Akinkugbe was immediately accepted for internship at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital in 1984. He concluded his internship in 1985 and proceeded for his National Youth Service at St. Gerard Catholic Mission Hospital, Kaduna. After the mandatory youth service, Dr. Akinkugbe was retained at the same hospital where he worked for 2 years as a medical officer at the hospital. Not forgetting his academic inclinations and desire for further training, Dr. Akinkugbe returned to Lagos in 1988 and commenced his fellowship training as a registrar at the Department of Medicine, Lagos University Teaching Hospital, Idiaraba, Lagos. He concluded his fellowship training successfully and was awarded the Fellowship of West African College of Physicians in 1994. He was immediately appointed consultant physician, nephrologist, and head of dialysis unit at Badaga General Hospital, Lagos, where he established the dialysis unit which is still functional and serving the people of Lagos till date. After 4 years of excellence and meritorious service at Badaga General Hospital, he proceeded to St. Nicholas Hospital in 1988, where over the years he has developed one of the most prestigious and functional dialysis units, which receives referrals from around the world. Dr. Bangboye was the first to set up a functional kidney transplant unit and to perform a successful kidney transplant in Nigeria and West Africa sub-region. This transplant program has been functional for over 2 decades since commencement. This laudable feat has put Dr. Bangboye, St. Nicholas Hospital, Lagos, and indeed Nigeria in the world map of nephrology. He is currently the clinical director at St. Nicholas Hospital, Lagos, where he is actively involved in clinical training. Although Dr. Bangboye has been working in the private setting for several years, his academic mind has remained very vibrant, and he has over 32 publications in both local and international journals of high repute. He has also presented several papers in local and international journals and chaired several plenary sessions in scientific conferences. In 2017, he became a fellow of the prestigious Royal College of Physicians, London, and in 2018, he was awarded a prestigious award as a fellow of Nigerian Association of Nephrology. That award is the highest in the Nigerian Association of Nephrology. So there's only a few that had that privilege of having that award. Dr. Bangboye has served in various capacities with different organizations, too numerous to mention. He served as secretary to several committees, including the Nigerian Medical Student Association, the Central Organizing Committee of Nephrology Association of Nigerian Conference, Organizing Committee of the Association of Physicians of Nigeria Annual Conference, Fundraising Committee, West Africa College of Physicians, Annual General and Scientific Meeting, and Acting Secretary, Nigerian Society of Hypertension. He has served as president of both the Nigerian Association of Nephrology and Transplant Association of Nigeria. He was the chairman Court of Governors of Lagos State University and is presently the co-chair Transplant Committee of the African Association of Nephrology. Dr. Ebo Bangboye is happily married and blessed with 3 children. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you this day a man who is a giant in the field of nephrology and who has written his name in gold in the medical profession. A man who has truly distinguished himself as an accomplished clinician and a truly reputable scholar, Dr. Ebo Bangboye, FWACP, FRCP, FNAN.
Good morning, everyone. I feel very privileged to be here today, and I would like to thank everyone for protocols. First of all, I would like to recognize the, in absentia, I believe, the special guest of honor, the executive governor of the state, who I believe is represented. I'm told the pro-chancellor might be here, Dr. Ayo Arujolu. I recognize him. The Vice-Chancellor, the amiable Vice-Chancellor, who has been most kind in his comments earlier, Professor Adesegun Fatusi. And the 2 Deputy Vice-Chancellors, who have also been privileged to have had some discussions with. The Registrar, Dr. Woleola Ekundayo. The Bossa, I'm told he likes being called MSO Shitu. The acting librarian, Mr. Femi Folorunsho, the representatives of the Osemawe, please extend to him my sincere greetings, and I recognize your individual distinguished presences here. Of course, the members of the family of my mentor, someone I regard as my father, Professor Akinkugbe, the members of the family represented here. My dear brother, Professor Olumide Ogundansi, thank you very much for dragging me out of Lagos to come here. And then, of course, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to try over the next couple of minutes to take you through, first of all, who this great man was, Professor Akinkugbe, and then take you through a crash course of what nephrology is and why Professor Akinkugbe is such an important person when we talk about nephrology, not just in Nigeria, in Africa, in the world. I have no disclosures, except, of course, that I'll be a bit biased being a son of Professor Akinkugbe, but I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk. This will be the outline of the talk, and I hope in the 45 minutes to 1 hour that I will have, I would leave you better informed than you might have been prior to your coming. So I'll talk about Professor Akinkugbe, I'll talk about chronic kidney disease and the challenges it poses to managing it in Nigeria today. Then, of course, we'll focus on the main topic, which is kidney transplantation. What's the situation in Nigeria? What's the situation in Africa and the rest of the world? What are the problems that we're having in being able to practice it optimally in our country today? And I would prefer various suggestions as to what I think we should be doing. I would also share our experience over the last 25 years at St. Nicholas. And of course, if you're open to that, we'll take some discussions, comments, questions, and answers. I bring you greetings from Lagos. For those of us that live in Lagos, it's difficult to drag us out of Lagos. But the last time I was in Ondo was about 10 years ago. And that was when I became the president of the Nigerian Association of Nephrology. The conference was in Akure. And we actually came to this university then on the invitation of the Vice Chancellor to inspect what is turning out to be a very beautiful and successful university. But I also bring you greetings from my hospital, St. Nicholas Hospital. St. Nicholas Hospital has been in existence now for 54 years. It's one of the oldest private hospitals in Nigeria that has been associated with a lot of very seminal, very pioneering work. We focused on a lot in the renal space in the last 25 years, and I am privileged to have been at the center of all that. We started off our dialysis unit on the 26th of August in the year 1998, which makes it exactly about 25 years ago now. And I recall that Professor Akinkugbe was actually the guest speaker at the opening of that university, of that center. And I recall his comments on that day, because as at that time we hadn't started transplants, and the focus was we needed to start transplants. And he had said, if anyone was going to do it, he felt the combination of factors present in the hospital at that time would ensure that St. Nicholas would be the ones to do it. And he was willing to be the fulcrum and supporter of ensuring that we did. So the university the unit has, of course, pioneered a lot of things, including carrying out the first transplant in this part of the world on the 6th of March in the year 2000. That's exactly 23 years ago that we actually carried out the first transplants. Currently, we've done close to 400 transplants. And this year, as you can see the trophy there, we actually won the trophy for the best run renal care dialysis unit in the whole of Nigeria. I'm very proud of that. The picture you see there is of the founder of that hospital, Chief Dr. Moses Adekoejo Majakodumi. He founded St. Nicholas Hospital 54 years ago when he left government as the Minister of Health and as, of course, the administrator of the Western region at that time, for those of you who are steeped in history. He also happens to be an in-law to the Akinkugbe family. So that explains the very close link that we have with him over the years. But today is about this distinguished scholar, Emeritus Professor O.O. Akinkugbe, who would have been 90 years today, or yesterday, if he had been alive. In fact, we're all looking forward to celebrating with him in Ibadan, where I'm sure he would have fitted us to quite a lot. Emeritus Professor Oladipo Akinkugbe was an enigma in his own right. He became a professor at 35 years of age. He established, in the renal space, he established the very first hypertension and renal clinic in the whole of the continent of Africa. He was one of the founders, there were about 10, 20 of such, that founded the African Association of Nephrology about 40, 50 years ago. And of course, he was the founding father and president, the first president of both the Nigerian Association of Nephrology and the Nigerian Hypertension Society. I think he has the singular honor of being the Nigerian that has occupied most in terms of university administration positions, much more than any other Nigerian alive today. Professor of Medicine, Dean of Medicine, Chair Committee of Deans, member of the Governing Council, public orator at the University of Ibadan. He was principal of the University College Ilorin before it became the University of Ilorin, and eventually became its first Vice Chancellor. He also became Vice Chancellor, of course, of the Ahmadu Bello University. If you've read his book, you will know of his saga there. And of course, Pro-Chancellor of the University of Port Harcourt. He was founding chairman of JAMB. He was chair of the planning committee of several universities, including University that we're in today. He was chair of the committee of pro-chancellors and chairman of university governing councils. He was chairman of the committee of teaching hospitals boards, and of course he has too many honorary degrees to be enumerated, including 4 DSCs. I happen to be privileged to have been very close to him. In fact, he regarded me as his son, not just as a mentor. We share the same name. My middle name is Ladipo. He took me as a son, not just as a mentor. He was in school with my father, and he actually, at my father's funeral, came all the way from Ibadan to Ife then to attend that funeral. As you know, I attended the University of Ilorin, where he was the founding vice chancellor. It's one of the reasons why I became a nephrologist. And I also became president of the Nigerian Association of Nephrology. I became the 13th president, whilst he was the first. He dragged me into several things, including the Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library Committee on Health Security. And I'm also privileged to be serving on the board of the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan, Akinkugbe Danjuma Foundation, which is focused on trying to make sure that we can include scholarship and research in our continent of Africa. I also was privileged to have looked after him in the latter days before he passed on. He was very active in the Nigerian Association of Nephrology. And this is a slide from, I think this must have been in 2017, when the conference was held in Ife. I think that's when I met the Vice Chancellor at the time. And you see, even at that age, he was still very active in attending such conferences. In 2020, he actually hosted the association in his residence. For those of you who know him, who've been to his house, that's his house. And he actually hosted the entire Nigerian Association of Nephrology at at that event in his house. And it was at that conference that we awarded him the ISN Pioneers Award in the year 2019. ISN is the International Society of Nephrology, and it is the apex gathering of all nephrologists in the world. And he received this award, and I was privileged to actually be the one to pass on the award because the president of ISN at the time was unable to attend. Like I said, he dragged me into a lot of things, including being a member of the Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library. And I'm sure if you look at this slide, you will recognize someone there that is very close to you in this university as well. I was privileged to serve along with him on that committee several years ago. And that committee was also the first speaker, distinguished speaker at this conference, Professor Adewale. I think that was when he was made minister, so he wasn't present with us at this. And finally, I and a couple of other colleagues were able to write his obituary in the Kidney International, which is the apex journal of nephrology in the world. And hardly would you find too many people recognized. But the journal actually recognized that this was a colossus, this was a pioneer that deserved to be recognized, and a whole page in that journal was devoted to him. But let's go on to why we're here today. We'll be talking about kidney transplantation, we'll be talking about chronic kidney disease. Now, it's almost 70 years since the very first kidney transplant was done. And that was done in a set of fortuitously, in a set of identical twins, Ronald and Richard Hendricks. It was done in Boston on the 23rd of December in 1954. So next year it will be 70 years. It's taken that long for it to gain its roots here in Nigeria. That particular recipient made full recovery. In fact, he was reputed to have married one of his nurses and lived for over 20 years in an era where hardly were there any immunosuppressants. And he didn't die, he died, the graft was still functioning. He actually died of a myocardial infarction. And this was another paper that was published just earlier this year. And this is of a 6-year-old who had a transplant 52 years ago. And so, of course, is now 58 years and still surviving with that graft. And that graft was taken from a diseased person, someone who had died, and was transplanted in him. And that kidney is still surviving 52 years after in a 58-year-old. So these are the possibilities that can happen when you are able to carry out a successful transplant. But what's the status of transplantation around the world? This graph, or this picture, looks at the entire world, and it's color-coded with the numbers of the prevalence of kidney transplantation being performed. And you find that whilst the United States of America and North America is very deeply colored, as is Western Europe, if you look at Africa, it's all gray, meaning that not much of kidney transplant is taking place in our continent. Over 150,000 transplants were carried out in the year 2021. About 100,000 of those were kidney transplants that particular year. But you'll find that majority of those transplants are being done in the developed world. 40% are being done in the Americas, about 25% in Europe. But what is important there is that only 1% of those kidney transplants are being done in our continent of Africa. The United States, of course, is the most successful when it comes to transplantation. They've done the largest number of transplants in the entire world. Last year, they achieved the landmark of over 1 million transplants being done in the US, and they actually have done 50% of those transplants in the last 15 years. In 2022, that year alone, they did over 25,000 transplants. But why is it a problem? Because even in the United States, you find it is expensive to care for patients with chronic kidney disease. So even though they are only about 8% of the population, they're spending about 20% of their budget on health, on looking after patients with chronic kidney disease. And we know that there's a very close association between the wealth of your country as a nation and your capacity to be able to carry out such complex things as a transplant. So we find that this graph looks at the global estimates of capacity for carrying out kidney transplants over the different regions. And you find that as the strength of the economy of such a country improves, your capacity to carry out transplants, the number of centers you have also increase. So for low-income countries, only about 23% of them are able to carry out transplants. And the number of centers is less than 0.04 per million population. So if you plot a graph of GDP and kidney transplant, you get almost a perfect graph, which shows that the stronger you are as a nation, the stronger your economy, the more the transplants that you can perform. But why should that be? At gatherings like this, I like to prod us. This is a map of Africa. And when you look at the way the map of the world is presented, you always get the impression that Africa is a lot smaller than it is. But if you look in terms of square meter surface area, you can actually fit the whole of the United States of America, the whole of China, the whole of India, the whole of Europe into the map of Africa. And yet, we are where we are. But if you look at the whole of the world economy in a single chart, you'll find that that small purple at the right corner is what represents the entire economy of the entire continent of Africa. In fact, only 3 countries, Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt, enter that graph. And that explains why, despite the fact that we're 17% of the population of the world, we only represent about 1% of the number of individuals who are able to be dialyzed or have a transplant. Despite the fact that we have 1.34 million people, we're the cradle of humanity. We're endowed with immense natural and human resources, but we remain the most underdeveloped of all the continents. And when you look at the United Nations Human Development Index, 30 out of the last 32 spots in that index are occupied by countries in Africa. And we depend on external sources for our healthcare. Consequently, you find that a lot of us depend on payments out of pocket for healthcare. And that is the problem with care of individuals with renal diseases. You find that almost the entire continent, the number of individuals who pay out of pocket. In Nigeria, it's 69% of us. And I'm sure if we look at it today, it probably would be worse. Compare that with the OECD countries, where the purple little blip at the top represents the percentage of people in those countries, which in contrast to what happens in Africa, are the ones who have to pay out of pocket. So what's the scenario in Nigeria's health sector? It's underfunded, there aren't enough doctors. We have about 25,000 hospitals in Nigeria. The ratio of doctors to patients is about 1 to 5,000. This was as at 2018. I've looked at recent figures and it is closer to 1 to 8,000 individuals. We don't spend enough on healthcare and our HMO penetrance is very low. Less than 5% of us are registered on an HMO. Meanwhile, we're dealing with a disease, chronic kidney disease, which affects roughly about 10% of the population of the world. It's estimated that about 850 million people have chronic kidney disease. And we know that the burden with us in the developing world is even greater. Looking at various studies that have been done, we know that the estimates of how the percentage of individuals with chronic kidney disease varies from about 10 to 16%. Studies have been done in Nigeria. Ulasi and her group in Enugu found a prevalence of a little under 12%. Nwankwo in Maiduguri found a prevalence of almost 18%. And it's estimated that worldwide, it's now the 12th leading cause of death worldwide, ahead of TB, which is 13th, HIV, which is 14th, and malaria. And alternatively, these are things that we spend a lot more money and attention on. It's also the 6th fastest growing cause of death, And by 2040, it's projected to be the 5th commonest cause of years of life lost globally. We know that 1/3 of us are prone to chronic kidney disease for several reasons. Common things that lead on to it: hypertension, diabetes. And as you get to know, because we are black people, we are even more prone. And a lot more focus is being placed on it because one of the incidents and prevalence is common. The fact that it's an expensive thing and the cost is getting more. And then the pressing moral conflicts that are associated with acceptable kidney donors, which we'll talk about, and then patient selection in countries where such care is provided by government for renal replacement therapy. And then, of course, there's the promise of effective prevention measures, which we'll also discuss mildly. So this is a long list of things that we know cause chronic kidney disease. I'm not going to go through all of them, but clearly hypertension and diabetes worldwide are the commonest causes. And we know that they're also responsible for a lot of mortality that we see. In Africa, chronic glomerulonephritis is believed to be even more common than hypertension and diabetes as causes of chronic kidney disease. When we looked at our statistics at St. Nicholas, clearly CGN, chronic glomerulonephritis, comes first, followed by hypertension, and then diabetes. But the important thing there is that diabetes is a rising cause. And when we published our data from Luth in 1992, looking at the first 10 years of dialysis in that first ever dialysis unit in the whole of West African sub-region, we found the prevalence of diabetes at that time was just 5%. Progressively, the numbers are increasing, and they're close to about 13% now. So these are the things that are responsible for this rise in prevalence. Diabetes, hypertension, both of which are becoming a lot more common. But then there are certain non-modifiable causes which I would also like us to talk a bit about. Of course, we know the older you get, the more likely. Men are slightly more likely than women, but then there also seems to be a tendency for it to affect different racial groups differently. And this more or less reflects that. And these are in countries that you have varied populations. So in the United States of America, where in the African American population, the prevalence of chronic kidney disease was about 800 per million population. Contrast that with what happens in the Caucasians, where it is less than 200. So in essence, something about being black makes us more prone to having chronic kidney disease than people of other ethnic origins. This is replicated also in the United Kingdom, where if you look at the whites and the African Caribbeans, prevalent amongst such than amongst others. What are the reasons for this? Could be poverty, ignorance, illiteracy, poor access to health. Some people even say intrauterine growth retardation. But all of these pale in significance to what has now been discovered as the inheritance of the apolipoprotein 1 gene. This is a gene that is carried on the chromosome 22. And it's been found that it confers substantial increased risk of developing kidney disease, developing hypertension at an early age, and also developing various forms of cardiovascular disease. We believe it was developed by selective polymorphism from exposure to the Trypanosoma gambiense parasite, which I'm sure the Deputy Vice Chancellor will know a lot about. And clearly, we know that this appears to be a factor. Because if you look at the prevalence of that apolipoprotein 1 gene, you find that it's greatest either in areas where Trypanosoma gambiense or rhodesiense was prevalent, and also in places where people have migrated from the regions of the world where that was prevalent several years back. So if you look at the different regions, and this is a slide that compares what happens in the West African sub-region, you find that easily 46% of us are homozygous for this apolipoprotein 1 gene, as compared with what happens with other racial groups. And this appears to very closely mirror the prevalence of chronic kidney disease in different parts of Africa. You find that the greatest prevalence is in the West African sub-region, which is about 16.5%, followed by the Central African region, followed by the South African, the East African, and you find that the North African or the Maghreb region has just about 4% compared to this. So it just shows that ethnicity must really have something to do with it. But interestingly, it also appears that even within the different racial groups, there's also a differential. So even in Nigeria, where we had noticed, and you'll get to see that later, where we appear to see more patients from the south-south and the southeast part of our country coming down with chronic kidney disease. Much more than southwest, which is where our own center is based. I'd always wondered why that was. And this was a study done in Nigeria, which was published in the Kidney International, where he found that the prevalence of this apolipoprotein 1 gene was highest amongst the Igbo-speaking population of our country. The Yorubas were 14%, and Hausa Fulani were only 2.1%. What are the options available for us in terms of managing chronic kidney disease? It could be conservative, various forms of dialysis, and transplant. We know chronic kidney disease is a major problem. Unfortunately, we don't have enough people to manage, to diagnose and manage. Very few units. The few units we have are all in urban areas, hardly any in the rural areas. Most of the units are small, they're poorly run and poorly maintained, and most of our patients present rather late. So it's not surprising that outcomes are poor. And if you look at this study, which was done in the University of Ife by Professor Arugundade, the current registrar of the Nigerian Postgraduate Medical College, where they looked at 1,200 patients that they had seen over 20 years, representing about 10% of their medical admissions. Of the 556 of them that were offered hemodialysis, only 38 of them survived more than 3 months. That's about 7%. For those, you found most of them who could even afford, hardly could afford more than 1 dialysis session per week. For all those who could not afford dialysis and were managed conservatively, 90% of them had died within 2 weeks. Overall, 87% of them were died within the first month of treatment. So that is a picture of what we're facing, and that's even in Ife. If you go to other parts of the country that are less endowed, you find that the picture is even more abysmal. But contrast that with what I am privileged to deal with. In a particular year, I think this was 2019, we managed 152 patients that year. The total mortality was less than 5%. And that's not saying that I know how to do it more than other people. It's just that I am privileged in the sort of patients that I have been called upon to manage. And the fact that as a policy, we encourage our patients to go ahead and have transplants as soon as we establish the diagnosis. We know that transplant is the best option when you have somebody who has end-stage renal disease. It's less costly and the risk of mortality is less. This is a very busy slide, but I would go ahead and explain. The x-axis, that's the horizontal axis, looks at different age groups, 0 to 19, 20 to 24, 25 to 29. The Y, or the vertical axis, looks at how many years you expect such people to still live at that age group. So in the normal population, if you are 20, we still expect you to live about 70 years more, as opposed to if you are 80, where we expect you to live about 20 years more in Europe. Of course, this is not in Nigeria, where our life expectancy is still under 57 years. Now, if you're on dialysis, you are that red line. If you manage to do a transplant, you move from that red line to the green line. So transplant improves you, but certainly doesn't take you back to normal completely. And as you'll notice, whether in the general population, the transplant population, or dialysis population, women always live longer than men. So I say the women give the men so much trouble that... In terms of costs, these are in countries where resources are available. You find that transplant is a lot cheaper than either of the two forms of dialysis, hemodialysis and peritoneal on the long term. So it makes more sense. And it's more pragmatic if you have a patient with end-stage renal disease to encourage such a patient to go ahead and have a transplant as quickly as possible. Dialysis costs currently about 50,000 per session. Ideally, you should do 3 sessions per week. So you're spending about 8 million per year. And that's prior to removal of subsidy. I'm sure things are going to worsen with time. A transplant is not cheap. It still costs between about 10 and 15 million. But usually if you can go ahead and do it, on the long term, it becomes cheaper. Unfortunately, what is the situation in Nigeria? This is the health-seeking behavior and access to health care at the primary level in Nigeria. We find that we're either going to prayer houses, to medicine vendors, to traditional healers, rather than visiting the hospital. We'd rather go to Dr. Juma, who can treat and solve many problems. I'm sure that swollen body is kidney failure. But it's the same potion that he gives you for that. He also gives you for court case and bad luck and customer attraction. Traditional healers have gone nuclear. You can see the computer that he's using in his divination. The quality of some of our hospitals, this is Makina Royal. I'm sure if you come to this hospital, it's disaster waiting to happen. You probably will go away with what you did not come there with. And this tendency for us to pray about everything, I'm not saying it's wrong to pray. But if you look at this chart, it's a chart of rates of daily prayer in different parts of the world. You find that in China, only 1% of them pray every day. In the US, maybe 55%. In Canada, 25%. The highest percentage of people that pray is in Nigeria. 95% of us pray. So what are the factors determining if you get a kidney transplant in Africa? It depends on which country you're based in. What is the GDP of that country? Do you live in the urban area of that country or the rural area? What is your health access and quality index? What's your HDI? Do you have a renal program? Is there NHIS? Is there a national health insurance? And does it provide care for individuals with kidney failure? What is your wealth quintile in such a country, your level of education? Are you a man or a woman? We know that families are more likely to spend money on the male members of the family than the women and on children. And that is an unfortunate truth. Then, of course, it depends on the number of trained nephrologists you have in the country. So looking at the wealth, these are the 10 richest African countries. And it's not coincidence that they're also the 10 countries where transplants are being done in the whole of Africa, from Nigeria all the way down to Tanzania. In fact, when I prepared this slide, I didn't realize that they had started transplants in Tanzania. So every single country in this chart are the ones that kidney transplants are being done. And if you look at incidence of kidney transplant by country, this is similar to the one I showed earlier. You'll find easily that there's a very close correlation between your capacity to do transplants and your GDP. Also a close correlation between your Human Development Index and your capacity to do transplants. And then a brief word about human resource. These are the number of transplants done, number of nephrologists available by continent. And you find that, as with most things, Africa is down to just 1 nephrologist per million population, as opposed to Western Europe, where there are over 30. You might argue that Nigeria probably has, short of Egypt, the highest number of nephrologists, but for a huge population. We have currently about 230 nephrologists in the whole of Africa. in the whole of Nigeria, but our population is about 220 million. So we have barely one nephrologist for every million of our population. So even though in terms of overall numbers, we do better than most countries, including South Africa, we unfortunately still do not have enough. But attrition is becoming a major problem. And this was a report looking at Nigerian nurses joining the UK workforce, and that it hit 8-year high. It is said there that according to the latest mid-year register of the Nursing and Midwifery Council in the UK, the number of nurses, midwives, and nursing associates from Nigeria rose by almost 50% in 1 year, from 7,000 to 10,000. And the top 3 countries providing nurses in the United Kingdom are India, the Philippines, and Nigeria. These are the top 10 countries where UK registered doctors originally qualified. India, Pakistan, and the third in that, over 10,000 Nigerian trained doctors practicing in the United Kingdom. And in the United States of America, this is now coning down on individuals who are nephrologists. Comparing us with all the other African countries, we have even more in terms of numbers than Egypt. And as at the time we published this in the Worldwide Book on Nephrology, there were close to 150 trained Nigerian nephrologists practicing in the United States of America. So what is the situation in our country, and is it likely to get better or worse? I had actually taken out this slide, but the VC asked that I should kindly put it in. This is the situation in my hospital. And looking at the number of people who've left the hospital for greener pastures since 2014. And you find that the numbers have increased from 35 in 2014, such that in 2021, this was actually November. By the end of December, we actually had 110 staff that left. And this is for a hospital that has 388 staff. So almost a quarter of the staff left. If you divide them into doctors and nurses, you'll find that the numbers, that particular year, over 16 doctors left, and close to 50 of the nurses left. And the reasons for leaving, you find that 70% of the nurses left because they were going out of the country. And over 56% of the doctors left because they were going outside the country. So I'm sure if we look back at that slide now, our numbers are likely. So if there are any doctors here, and if I ask how many of us are likely to be here in the next 4 or 5 years, if you ask your current set of graduates, how many of them propose to continue to practice in Nigeria, you'll be surprised that very few. So in terms of transplantation in Africa, South Africa is the clear leader in sub-Saharan Africa. Sudan also do about a little under 200 transplants yearly. Nigeria we've been doing transplants since the year 2000, and we are the pioneers in the West African sub-region. And there are over 10 or 15 units now carrying out transplants in Nigeria. In sub-Saharan Africa, these are the countries where transplants are done, and proudly, Nigeria is not doing too badly when it comes to numbers eventually. What are the peculiar challenges militating against successful development of transplant programs? The major one, of course, is the high cost. The fact that most of our countries are low in GDP. And consequent on that, we have inadequate infrastructure and institutional support, poor knowledge of the disease, poor accessibility to healthcare, and of course, various religious and cultural practices. Many of us are apolipoprotein 1 positive, FSGS, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, which has a tendency to recur after a transplant, is one of the more frequent causes of chronic kidney disease in our environment. And we have infections, CMV. Almost 100% of our patients are CMV positive, which poses a problem post-transplant. There's high prevalence of various infections. Many of our patients have had multiple blood transfusions, all of which present problems in the management of these patients. Also, there's a tendency for too many units to want to do transplants. And the consequence of that is that not enough centers are doing enough to acquire adequate enough experience. But there's some advantages. Our patients generally are younger, so they have less comorbidities. They're less females, so they're less likely to have had pregnancies and have antibodies that may pose problems in the course of transplant. We don't have that many pediatric patients because not many of our centers support pediatric transplants. We haven't started cadaveric transplants yet. And our patients generally have not been on dialysis for long prior to the transplants. So generally, these are somewhat positive advantages of doing a transplant. So currently, over 1,400 transplants have been done in Nigeria. All have been live. We have yet to start disease donor transplants. It's been a mixture of open and laparoscopic nephrectomies. There's been some concern about commercial kidney donations, but maybe we'll talk a bit to that later. And most of the public-based programs are small. This is a list of all the centers currently in Nigeria that have carried out successful transplants, starting with the first in St. Nicholas in year 2000 and down to the more recent one, which is Abuad, which started off in the year 2020. I'll be looking forward to including the University in Ondo in this list the next time I have to prepare this slide. Doctor, I hope that's on the cards. So what are the peculiarities of successful units? The privately run ones are more successful, evidently, and you find that it's because they're centered around urban, highly populated, enlightened, and economically endowed cities like Lagos, Abuja, and Kano. It requires an empathetic, focused, innovative, and motivated individual to be a driving force. And he must have the backing of the authorities that be. Because it's very cost intensive, it's going to require a lot of sacrifice on the part of all those involved. And you can't just do it as an ego trip. Otherwise, you'll do one, as have many of the centers, and that will be all. You will not be able to sustain it. Thank you. Yes, thank you. So what are the challenges of the public health institutions? Many of them are understaffed, but I also said they're overstaffed, and Professor Ugunausi was wondering what I meant by that. Overstaffed in the sense that once you say you're starting off a program, everybody wants to get involved in it. And as they say, too many cooks spoil the broth. And then they will then start infighting. The urologists want to be in charge. The nephrologists want to be in charge. The lab people now feel that you can't do it without us. And those are the things that end up destroying the programs. And that is one advantage of a private hospital. I mean, it's what I say, that's what goes. And that's the only way that you'll be able to build up and sustain a program. Many of them have very poor maintenance cultures. You start off with several, thank you. You start off with several dialysis machines, and by the time you ask, they're down to 3, maybe 4 or 5 functional machines. Work ethic is very poor. There's poor attitude to patients. I was discussing this with the dean of the dentistry yesterday, and the challenges he's having with his own program as well. And you find that for you to sustain a program, when I do transplants, as old as I am, I don't go home until 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m., and I'm back at work at 9 a.m. the following day. So if I'm doing that, God help anybody else who says they want to go. We all stay there. That's the only way you're able to build and sustain a program. Then you start off with all kinds of interdisciplinary rivalry. Like I said, the surgeons want to be the one in charge rather than the physicians, and then recurrent strikes. Each time there's a strike, by the time you come back, all your patients are dead. Then, of course, corruption. I would not bother to say too much about that. I think that's obvious to all of us. These are the geopolitical locations of all the transplant units, and you see clearly we in the Southwest seem to have a greater advantage. Each of the other political, socio-geopolitical divisions of Nigeria have just one unit. In the northeast is Maiduguri, in the northwest it's Kano, north central it's Ilorin, in the south-south it is Ogara, in the southeast it's Umahia. But there are over 6 units in the southwest. And this is that distribution. Of course, Lagos has 3 of those units. And these are the various units that have successfully carried out transplants. And there's one you'll note there, the Zenith Medical and Kidney Center, which not only started years after us in St. Nicholas, but has since overtaken us in terms of numbers. And it's because there's a very focused young man, Dr. Latishi, who has been in charge of that unit. What has been our experience at St. Nicholas Hospital? Very quickly, I know it's getting a bit late. We've ensured we have collaborated with various units in the United Kingdom, in India, and of course in the US. The first transplant was done 6th of March 2000. We've done 380 now. Several retransplants. We've actually transplanted a lady that did her 4th transplant with us. And we have a focus on ensuring that our donors are genetically related to our recipients. The ages have ranged from as young as 11 to as old as 67, and the mean age has been 46 years. More men than women, and these are the numbers we've done over the years. You'll find that the numbers progressively are increasing. And this year, we're projected to carry out about 60 transplants. More men than women, slightly younger age, hypertension, more common than chronic glomerulonephritis, but diabetes on the increase. Like I said, yes, we're in the Southwest, and 76 of them have come from there. But by the time you add South, South, and Southeast, the numbers outstrip the numbers from the Southwest. And I think it has a lot to do with the differential in inheritance of the apolipoprotein gene. Our donors, you can't have a donor under 18 years. And generally, you want to avoid donors over 65, but we've taken from a 70-year-old mother who gave her daughter. The donors are slightly younger than the recipients, and there's a male preponderance when it comes to the ages of the donors. We're very strict about relationships, and we insist that you have to be genetically related to the recipient. In the absence of that, we accept emotional relationship. So if it's a husband, and we've had 8 husbands that have given to their wives, but we've also had 10 wives that have given to their husbands as well. We've had a father-in-law that gave to the daughter's husband. We've had very many, very interesting combinations. We tend to want to do our donor nephrectomies laparoscopically when we can, and that has the advantages of shorter stay in hospital, fewer complications, and quicker recovery, which encourages the donors. This is a donor the day after he donated. By the 3rd day, he was home. Even though we do transplants, many of our patients still go elsewhere, and many of them go to India. Our statistics, total transplants we've done, as at the time we put this together, was 371. 1 year graft survival, 92%. 1 year patient survival, 96%. 5 year, 68%. 10 year, 36%. And of course, our patients that have gone abroad, many of them are non-altruistic. Those that we've rejected because we feel that the donor is not related and it's a commercial donor. They go with the same donor to India and the transplant is done. And they often come back with all kinds of complications. Typical one, this man who rejected the kidney almost immediately after and was just put on the plane from Pakistan and sent back, died shortly after. But we have the WHO, the Transplant Society, and the International Society of Nephrology trying to call on member states to take measures to protect the poorest and vulnerable from transplant tourism and commercial transplantation. So this was done, this led to the Declaration of Istanbul, which was done in Istanbul about 15 years ago. And if you look where that blue arrow is, I happen to have been one of the 100 people that put the Istanbul Declaration together, which is meant to discourage transplant tourism, organ trafficking. And I'm determined to make sure that in our country, Nigeria, we also guard against it. Now, if you are easily shocked, I would advise that you look away. This is what we're trying to prevent. This was a young man who kidnapped his neighbor's son and slaughtered the boy, took out his heart, his liver, his kidney, and sold it to a babalao. So these are the sort of things that would happen, that are happening even in our society today. So we now have the Nigerian Health Act, but what does it say? That if you as a doctor take out a kidney from somebody who you shouldn't take it out for, you'll be fined 1 million naira. You just add the 1 million to the cost that you are taking from the patient. And you, the patient, if you sell your organ part, 100,000 naira. We don't believe that these are deterrents enough. Maybe the deterrent for disease donor is worse or is much stronger. This is imprisonment for 5 years without option of fine. So what are the things that we can do to improve the situation? We need to increase the number of dialysis units, train more nephrologists, nurses, and technicians, improve the quality of the training that we give them and the equipment that they have to work with. And we should be thinking of transferring our patients to transplants earlier. We should improve the quality of patients that are referred. We should manage the anemia and avoid blood transfusion. On my way here this morning, one of our potential transplants has gone back to the east. And the doctors managing him are concerned. They want to transfuse. And I say, please don't. We need to avoid femoral cannulations. The kidney is transplanted using the vessels that you would use femoral cannulations to achieve. We should vaccinate our patients, and we should appropriately treat those that are positive for various infections. And then transition to renal transplantation as soon as possible. Because we know that the shorter time the individual spends on dialysis, the better the short and the long-term outcomes. We should improve the level of collaboration. We all should not want to do it all by ourselves. We should collaborate with established centers, collaborate amongst ourselves, maybe merge centers, possibly certify to do transplant only those units that can do a certain number per year, and then continue to train, audit, and monitor even those centers that are carrying out transplants. And you can do this by making sure that you have a registry that collates results and outcomes. And then when you get stronger, you can then start taking on the marginal cases. We've done several HIV, hepatitis C, sickle cell. I said we've done a fourth transplant. The immunosuppressive drugs are quite expensive. Just before I came, the price of ATG for 25 milligrams is about 300,000 naira. If you're going to do a transplant, on average, you need about 10. So just on that drug alone, it's going to cost about 3 million. And the makers came and said, well, with the current change in the price of the naira to the dollar, they think that that 300,000 is going to go up to 500,000. And this is one critical factor that determines the success of the transplant. And then, of course, you must have the capacity to be able to do plasmapheresis, which we have in the hospital. And then eventually we must start looking at disease donor transplants, which would mean wider cooperation between our different units, such that a kidney might become available in Ondo, but the patient it matches is in Lagos. You must have a way of ensuring that you can transport that kidney within the required time to ensure that it can successfully be done before the organ becomes disused. To do this, we must have a law, and Lagos State process of enacting such a law. You must increase public awareness, and then you must ensure functional and cooperating intensive care units, And then there must be collaboration between the different centers. This has already been done in Mauritius. Then, of course, to encourage our live donors, we must follow them up. We shouldn't abandon them shortly after they've given the organ. We should enforce altruism and avoid commercial kidney donation. And then we should be able to locally ensure availability of the different tests that we do. Even we still send some of our tests abroad. And find ways to bring down the costs, carry out research that is relevant in our environment, and then indigenize the various programs. But most importantly, we need to focus on prevention. Even in the United States, with all their resource, they're finding that they cannot continue to sustain spending almost $50 billion on looking after patients with kidney disease. They're now ensuring that we now look towards more of prevention. So in conclusion, a lot has changed in African nephrology over the last 30 years. Of course, we've had all kinds of instability, wars, various epidemics, corruption, all have served as impediments to growth. The pattern of illness has changed. The non-communicable diseases are now more common, diabetes, like we said. Capacity and competence is improving. Quality and outcomes are also improving. Kidney transplants have become much more widely available. And evidently, Emeritus Professor Oladipo Akinkugbe played a major role in the progress seen in African nephrology over the years. Many thanks for your attention. I always live with this slide. This is a gentleman that donated his kidney to his wife. And we did this transplant 24th of January in the year 2001. And they're both still alive and doing well. Thank you.
Another round of applause for the distinguished lecturer on this occasion. Thank you very much. Okay. Just before the presentation, we have on this occasion dignitaries who have just joined us for this event. Mr. Vice Chancellor, we have the Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of Governing Council of the University here present. He is a Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming Professor Ayodele Arowojolu. You're welcome, sir. Another member of the Governing Council is also present, and he is also the Commissioner for Health in Ondo State. Please join me in welcoming and celebrating Honorable Dr. Banji Awolowo Ajaka. And the representative of the Ondo State, Honorable Commissioner for Education, Ondo State Ministry of Education, is here present in person of the Director of Education, Mrs. Bashira Osani. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, we have on this occasion the Special Advisor to the Governor of Ondo State on Education and the Superintendent Officer in charge of tertiary education in the state, Dr. Olawumi Elawole. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, permit me also to welcome on this occasion the Special Advisor to the Governor on Strategy, Political and Legislative for Ondo State, Honorable Dr. Jibayo Adeyeye. And permit me, sir, to also warmly welcome on this occasion a very good friend, member of the Akinkugbe family here present. She is the proprietress of Foundation Nursery and Primary School, Ondo, Mrs. Onyekon Akimurele. You're welcome, ma'am. That should be the size of further recognition that we have on this occasion. Now it is time for the presentation of award to the distinguished lecturer on this occasion. Once again, please join me in welcoming the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic of the University, Professor Rose Angela I. Wumba, as she steps forward to make a presentation to the lecturer today.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the University Governing Council, the university management, and the entire university community, we are presenting this gift to you, Dr. Bamboye, for this wonderful, interesting, and very valuable lecture. Thank you for coming. We are having you here, and we say thank you very much for your presence.
Very much. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, I've just been informed that actually Honorable Commissioner for Health and member of the Governing Council, Honorable Dr. Banji Awolowo Ajaka, is actually representing the Governor of Ondo State, Arakunrin Oluwarotimi Odunayo Akeredolu SAN, on this occasion. Thank you very much, sir, and welcome once again. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, permit me at this point to invite the Director for the Central Office for the Research Development of the University to step forward and give a vote of thanks on this occasion. Please put your hands together for Professor Olumide Ogundansi.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by thanking our distinguished lecturer, Dr. Bangboye. Thank you for a truly educative and stimulating lecture. Several years ago, when we were teenagers and were studying excretion in mammals, I recall it was you that unpacked the process of glomerular filtration and tubular resorption and secretion to me. So it's no wonder that you went on to become a world-class nephrologist. Clearly, the decision of the university to invite you to deliver this lecture was very apt. You knew the man closely, he mentored you, and indeed, like you said, he was like a father to you, and you've emerged as a trailblazer in his subspecialty. I know your time is very much in demand. We thank you for taking time to prepare and deliver what has turned out to be a very, very stimulating lecture. I'd like to also thank the Ushimawe in Council and all the high chiefs here present. Each time we do invite you, you honor us with your presence, and we are grateful for the support that you give so willingly to the university. When Ondo State government decided almost a decade ago to establish a university that was specially focused on medical and health sciences, it seemed an outlandish idea. But it has turned out to be a very visionary one, and it's now been copied by federal, state, and private universities and all over the country. The state government has continued to support this university by providing finance and boosting morale. And we're grateful for this. We appreciate the presence of the representative of the governor, Dr. Ajata, also a council member. We are grateful that you are able to attend today. The same must be said for the University Council, as evidenced by the presence of members of the council here in person and virtually. Indeed, the chairman of council is here. We thank you for traveling all the way to honor this invitation and the support that you continue to give to the university. This event, as you all know, honors the towering legacy of one of the heroes. And indeed, the history of UNIMED cannot be written without the mention of his name as the first chairman of council. And so we are always grateful to members of the Akinkugbe family for always, at every occasion of this lecture, honoring us with your presence. We especially recognize that the Vice Chancellor said in the course of his speech that Professor Mrs. Folashade Akinkugbe is with us and indeed can no longer be with us. But we comfort in the memory that she rests with her husband with the saints triumphant above. So thank you for honoring our invitation and also coming. We would like to thank all the members of the audience, physical and online, and all our guests. We appreciate your presence here today, members of the university community, for your attention throughout the lecture. Indeed, it was quite engaging, and it was clear that we all remain engaged. Time, of course, does not permit me to mention you all individually by name, but clearly your presence has made a difference. And to quote Professor Chinua Achebe, Professor Chinua Achebe wrote that when a man calls his kinsmen to a feast, he does not do so to save them from starving, because they all have food in their homes. And when we gather together in the village, it's not because of the moon. Every man can do so in his own compound. We come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so. And indeed, on this occasion, we called you and you honored our invitation. You prioritized your attendance at this lecture and you made your way here, or you logged in by Zoom, as the case may be. So for that, I thank you on behalf of the university. It will be remiss of me, of course, to fail to thank members of the University Ceremonies Committee, as well as members of staff from the Works Department, the ICT Directorate, the Center for Health Professions and Biomedical Education, and the Vice Chancellor's Office. You all worked assiduously to make this occasion a success, working in the background. So thank you so much to everybody. And on that note, I'd like to wish you all a most pleasant afternoon and Godspeed as you return to your homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May we all be on our feet and take the anthems. We are going to take the university anthem, Ondo State anthem, and the national anthem. First, UNIMED anthem.
Making room to pursue excellence for research and
Please remain standing while the procession of the Vice Chancellor departs in reverse order.
Professor Oladipo more like a father to me, and encouraged me in my journey to ensuring that kidney transplants became available in Nigeria. The hospital where I'm based carried out the very first transplant, 6th of March in the year 2000, 23 years ago. Since then, we've been able to sustain the program. And largely the encouragement and advice that Professor Oladipo Akinkugbe gave us over the years. I feel highly honored to be invited to give this third series of distinguished lectures in his honor. And the lecture focused on kidney transplantation in Nigeria. Where should we be? How are we compared with other nations, both in Africa and the rest of the world? And what really should we be doing to ensure that we can improve on the lot of our patients with chronic kidney disease? Chronic kidney disease is very, very common. Over 15% of people have chronic kidney disease. That is, for every 7 people, 1 person has kidney failure. And it's estimated that over 100 people per million population every year require kidney transplantation. And 200 million, 220. So 22,000 people ideally should be on dialysis. So the total number of people on dialysis is less than 5,000. And as you heard, 90% of people who require dialysis and don't get it will be dead within 2 weeks. So it's not surprising the number of people that are dying from kidney failure. One, we're not recognizing them. 2, we're not developing the capacity to be able to adequately manage. That was the focus of the lecture. So what are the challenges that we're having? What can we do that would ensure that our long-suffering patients get the better care that they well and truly deserve? It's a short time to speak all about kidneys and kidney transplantation. I hope it's 1 hour that we're available to the right team, those who are virtually and what we as a country should be doing.
You mentioned the disease is more prevalent here in Africa or even in Europe. Why? Is it because people are not using enough?
Well, there are several reasons. And like I said during the book of semester, many of us don't recognize them. We have the common conditions that cause it. We don't recognize them, and we go and try alternative drugs. So hypertension is 50% of individuals over 50. But only 30% of those who have hypertension need only 30% of those who have it are treated. Either because someone has told them hypertension is like malaria, you treat it and you have hypertension is for life. Even it's recently more so these days, the cost of care. One tablet for hypertension sometimes costs $10,000. So many times people are on 3. So even if they know that they should take treatment, some of them cannot afford to take it. So it's not surprising that many people with hypertension end up with something. Zero diabetes, only half of those who have diabetes know. So many people are ending up with kidney failure. And then chronic infections, we're not treating them well, and many people are developing kidney failure. So in terms of what to do, one, it's an expensive thing to deal with. So even in America spends over $40 billion. They even are finding that they can't afford it. So we have to focus on prevention. So we need to detect early. We need to screen our population. We need to go out there, school children, pregnant women, university, undergraduates, let's detect early. And we know that if we treat these people properly, these early stages, they will not develop kidney failure.
How does one prevent that? Or is it natural?
You detect the things that lead up to it and make sure that you control those things. Hypertension, diabetes, chronic infection. Don't use drugs indiscriminately. Even your analgesics, like Panadol, or your non-steroidals, if you overuse them, those who use bleaching creams, those who use toxic herbs, all your native herbs are safe. You know all those things can lead on to kidney failure. Those are the things to avoid.
There seems to be little more to say chronic kidney failure. What would be advice to us in patients and so? And again, sir, how do you an estimate of how much taking or transplanting our kidneys in Nigeria, like annually?
Well, that's difficult to say. The average transplant will cost not less than 20 million in 2 years. So if you say 20,000 people develop kidney failure every year and require transplant, you can multiply 20,000 by 20 million. So that would give you the sort of figures that we're looking. We know that the country can't afford that. And that's why the focus on prevention should really be what I would advise government to look at. Make transplants available, certainly focus on prevention. All right.
For us, really, is a special event. So, one, help us remember the great man, Professor Akinkugbe, who was our first chancellor, and to continue to remember the great legacy, so that we can continue to challenge ourselves to follow in the footsteps of such a man. We believe very strongly that excellence really starts when you recognize it, when you reward it, when you celebrate it. So we are very intentional about being a people of good culture and a people of excellence. And that's why we celebrate this Akinkugbe lecture every year.
You talked about the importance to the tertiary.
So Akinkugbe was a man who was a connoisseur, whose impact on the health system of Nigeria and the university system is thoroughly unforgettable as far as disease. He is the one who has served at the highest position of Vice Chancellor in at least 2 universities. The Pro-Chancellor, number 3 universities. He started the whole issue around leading nephrology. Like we had the lecture. The first clinic on hypertension and nephrology in Africa was started by him. He was such a great man that we cannot but continue to celebrate his life and his impact.